Welcome to the Manaverse Podcast. I'm your host, Tom Traplin, and this is the podcast where we explore what it takes to build a successful, friendly local game store. If you like what you hear on today's episode, make sure you subscribe to the podcast on whatever fine platform you're listening on, and if you're listening to this on YouTube, hit the like and subscribe button. As always, you can find the notes and links mentioned in today's episode at manaversesaga.com. We've got Whitman Bottiger today, the owner of Critical Hit Games. Critical Hit Games is a WPN Premium game store in Abingdon, Maryland, carrying the classic selection of TCGs, miniatures, RPGs, and board games, with a special focus on custom TCG formats, which I definitely want to dive into because I'm very curious about that aspect of things. Welcome to the podcast, Whitman.
Thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
Thank you very much for joining. I'm glad we could connect today and we have an opportunity to have a conversation. To kick things off, the way that I always like to start the podcast and the way that I always like to introduce store owners to the audience is talking about the origin story, about where the game store came from. How did you get into this business? Why game stores? Why not any of the millions of other options that people have available to them? So what is the origin of Critical Hit Games?
I feel like probably most game store owners, it just comes from a passion at gaming from very young age. Got into gaming probably was about middle school with Magic the Gathering and Dungeons & Dragons. And in my town of Abingdon, Maryland, where I grew up, which is just a little north of Baltimore, there was one game store after one game store after one game store after one game store. The whole come and went, and they were the classic 90s, 80s style, 2 tables in a room and some product on the shelf kind of game store. And then when I was my mid-20s, the local game store around me that I was visiting had once again, for the many times, closed. And I thought, I feel like this could be done a little better, a little more professional. So I took what little money I had at the time and just went for it. And luckily, there was really no competition in my area at the time. Most of the game stores around here are really clustered around the Baltimore area. But as you get outside to northern Maryland, there's very few game stores around. So that's pretty much it. Just seen a lot of what not to do from failed businesses before me.
Interesting. I'm sure there's a lot of game store owners who had a similar experience watching this constant ebb and flow of shops open and close, as tends to be the way in this industry. So, from your perspective, what did they do wrong? What was their common failure? Why did they go through that cycle of opening up and then shutting back down?
I think it's sort of people who open a business more of a clubhouse than an actual business. It's I like playing games. I want to play the games with my friends. Let's open a store with game space and invite my friends over to play games, which is fine. It's a fun thing to do, but you could do that at home in your basement for free. Mm-hmm. You don't really need a business to do that. And so there is a lot of focus on events and not much focus on serving the community with the products that they're looking for. I see a lot of stores that weren't well kept, just dirty. You'd be surprised how many stores when I was growing up that just weren't clean. Would be not a place for children, not a place for families, and people who just zero experience running a business. To be fair, when I first started, I didn't have much experience running a business either, but I was willing to learn. Mm-hmm. And so that's the kind of stuff that I saw. I remember when I first opened, right before I first opened, I decided to do a tour of all the game stores in my area, up to a 50-mile radius, something like that. And I remember walking into one shop, I won't say its name, doesn't exist anymore. I remember walking in, and the owner was on the phone, cell phone, talking off with a friend, didn't acknowledge me. There had clearly never been clean. There was just dust covering everything. There were some people playing a card game in the back very loudly, cursing, and it sounded like a Counter-Strike chat room back there. And
there's a throwback.
And I also remember there was a leak in the ceiling that was pouring onto some comic books and dry rotting the comics or something. Like they weren't protected or anything. It was just water on top of comic books. And I thought, wow.
That's impressive.
Yeah. And then there are other stores that I walked into that still exist today that are really good, and we're like, oh, this is how you do it. This is a clean room. The game area is separate from the store area. People can shop in peace. I was greeted when I walked in the door. Basic stuff.
Yeah. So you saw a lot of what not to do before diving into things.
Yeah.
So when you were doing this tour and you were taking a look at all of these game stores in the area that, may or may not have been doing things right or may have been doing things a little bit better, what were like some of the ideas that you had that you incorporated into your vision for Critical Hit?
I definitely wanted the shopping area and the game area to be separate. There's so many stores I walked into where they had the product on the walls all the way to the back of the building, and then down the middle of the store with all these game tables. And I mean, seeing people play games that you sell in the store is a way to advertise the games you have in the store, but it's also a way to really interrupt somebody who just wants to quietly shop. If someone really wants to play a game or see the game room or take a look there, it should be accessible, but it really felt like it should be segregated, and that just wasn't something most stores were doing back then. A lot of things I just learned the hard way. I went in with a lot of knowledge of what not to do. What I should be doing, that was learned over the years more than anything else.
So what are the lessons that you learned initially? What were those things that you discovered like in the first year or two that you're like, oh, this is what I need to be doing? Why isn't more people doing this?
A lot of it really was the attitude. It was really just attitude. I knew I didn't want to do kind of a clubhouse thing, but right at the beginning, I noticed that my main customers were a kind of clubhouse crowd. It was just, hey, it's my friends, So I really needed to kind of expand out, and that's really with the way we do events, I guess. In the early days, we did a lot of highly competitive stuff, top-end prize pools for Magic events, and that draws a certain sort of grinder crowd, and we still do events for those kinds of people, and they still have them as customers. But if you really want to reach out and get more of the casual kitchen table players, families, kids, parents, the attitude that we have with running events is much more like flat prize pool, participation events, things like that. A lot more much bigger focus on D&D than we used to do. So I mean, I see a lot of. I would see stores around us do, big Magic events, but then there was nothing else. And it's nice to walk into a store and see a bunch of people playing D&D, and there's, parents and then the next generation playing with them at the same time. And it just comes with the attitude of how you run your store and how you organize your events.
That makes a lot of sense. The idea of having this different mindset from other game stores, and I think that is a common mistake that a lot of stores make, especially the clubhouse stores that you reference, is that people come in with this idea of like, I'm going to serve the hyper-competitive Magic player because sometimes that's what they are, right? That's what they identify as, and they're like, oh, I'm really into this game. I really love this game. I'm going to make a business out of this game, and then I'm going to serve people like me when they're not necessarily the best customers for a long-term successful business.
Yeah, absolutely. If I run a big qualifier Magic tournament or something like that, I'll get people from all over to come by the store, but the people I don't ever usually see again. They might come by, they might buy a few single cards, and then see you next year. But if I focus on more casual events that hyper focus really on the local community, then I will see the same people over and over and over and over again, and that translates into much more sales.
Exactly. That's more of a long-term strategy.
Yeah.
Making people comfortable enough to come out and play with their friends who aren't necessarily interested in going to the Pro Tour or something like that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, what do you do to, like, other than hosting the events, right? You said you flatten the prize pool. That automatically kind of pushes certain player types away, right? Because if you're a shark or if you're into grinding and you really want to win, coming out for 4 booster packs or something at a pre-release is not like super exciting. They'd rather go win the booster box somewhere else, right? Mm-hmm. So other than flattening the prize pool, which naturally incentivizes that sort of play, do you do anything else to attract those players? Like, do you advertise that this is a new player-friendly kind of event or family-focused? Like, what kind of stuff do you do?
Absolutely. That was a really difficult transition when we moved from sort of the shark players to the casual players. Because like, oh God, we're going to lose people. And you're like, you're right, people are not going to want to show up to an event. But, for every person we lost, it became 10 more. So we're down the long run. As far as like reach out, yeah, we do like we have something called Magic Academy, which is just a program for new players, and it's like 4 weeks, 4 Sundays in a row. It's like first one's my first game where you just teach someone to play. The second one is my first deck, and then it's my first tournament, and then my first booster draft. And they're designed not so much to teach people to play Magic. I mean, it does teach people to play Magic, but lots of people show up to them already kind of know the basics. What it's designed to do is to make people feel comfortable in a store setting for an event. I find that's one of the biggest barriers. Going to a game store for a lot of people is like going to a gym for the first time. You know, it's the same level of nervousness. Am I going to be made fun of? As everyone else there knows more than I do.
Is this place for me?
Yeah, is this place for me? It's anyone who owns a gym is going through the same thing. Everyone who owns a game store is going through. And so it's really, really thought about, like, how do I break down as many barriers to somebody who's thinking about coming to their local game store for the first time? That he only plays at home, maybe with just friends or family, and that's it. That's going to feel comfortable playing with a stranger that they don't know, maybe with the idea of being paired against somebody, or there being a prize. Is it too competitive? Is it, that's the kind of stuff that I find a lot of players who aren't necessarily your local game store customer yet worry about. And so those are the kind of programs that we do. Same thing with Dungeons & Dragons. We have an open play D&D night that is just, here's a table for new players, here's a table for kids, and here's a table for everyone else. And we just have 3 DMs going on at the same time. Every Wednesday it looks like a little mini RPG convention here. And it's about breaking down those mental barriers people have about coming to a new place with strangers, that they're afraid that maybe they're not good enough in the game, or they don't know as much. And that's the kind of stuff that we really do for outreach.
Yeah, there's a level of intimidation when you're new to something, especially like new to the space, but also maybe new to the game, new to the hobby. Mm-hmm. That's a lot of obstacles that could potentially prevent somebody from coming to your shop and being a customer and shopping with you, hopefully for the long term. And I really like that metaphor of comparing the game store to the gym. It's a good way of thinking about it, because it is very similar experience-wise for somebody who's maybe never participated, who doesn't identify as somebody who goes to the gym. Going to the gym for the first time is an intimidating experience, because you look at all these people who are huge in lifting heavy weights, and
they know what they're doing.
Yeah, they know what they're doing, and they're not getting hurt, right? And there's elements of that, but I think it's a really great way to think about the game store and how somebody coming into it for the first time is experiencing it, and trying to put yourself into their shoes and think, okay, what would I need to do to feel comfortable, to come in and actually have this, to shop, but also to participate and become part of the community. So for the academy, this program that you have, do you do this on a regular basis? Like how does this work? How do people get into it?
Every pre-release we tie it in with. We do Friday, Saturday, Sunday pre-releases. On the Sunday is the first class. It's like $20. You sign up, and that's all. You're good. And we'll give out more than $20 worth of packs. It's a bit of a loss leader, but I'm making new players, so I'm okay just taking a small hit on it. But if it'll start with a couple of jumpstart packs if they don't know how to play. But other than that, here's your pre-release kit. Here's your prize packs for your pre-release kit. Let's talk about how to build a deck. And then next week it's come back with the cards you opened, and here's some more packs. Let's build a 60-card constructed deck. And we're just going to talk about deck building, and you guys can hang out and play. And here's some more packs. And then week 3, it's like, all right, I know this deck you built. Let's do a little best-of-1 mock tournament, 3 rounds. And we'll give out packs. Kind of gives the idea of how Friday Magic's going to feel. And then week 4 is just concept of booster draft, because I feel if you're going to play your local game store, you should probably know the basics of booster draft. It's going to come up. And then when they're done, they get a coupon to the free entry to an F&M. So please come back.
So lots of value.
It's also really good. Yeah, it has a lot of value. It's also really good for WPN metrics, because they're looking for returning players. And that's 4 events they've returned for, because we sign them up using their Wizards ID for all of these. And then they come back to their free F&M and one more event, and they're an engaged player.
I like it. It's a really easy way to kind of build those metrics up and get to that point where you can qualify for
if you're looking for premium, you need to make engaged new players specifically, and that's an excellent way of doing it.
Do you do any promotions for this sort of thing, or is it just naturally like people hear about it and they come out after the pre-release?
Just social media promotions. We print some flyers to hand out at the counter, but that's about it. Yeah.
And it's a consistent flow of people coming in.
Yeah, it's not huge numbers, but we get people every pre-release, and even if it's only a couple, perfect. If I get 12 people show up, hey, even better.
Hey, 12 people every 2 to 3 months.
Every 3 months, that adds up fast. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good growth, and that's one of the things that I like to talk about when it comes to game stores and the idea of like what a customer is worth, like not morally or judgment or anything like that, but like the idea of like how much is a customer going to spend with your business over the course of the lifetime that they're going to be interacting with you, right? And if you added it up and you could do the averages and you could track all the metrics and figure it all out, a single customer, like a single Magic player who's a casual committed player who plays F&M every week and likes to buy booster packs and comes out to the pre-releases and is active in the community, they're spending a lot of money with you.
Yeah.
Right? Potentially thousands of dollars over the course of a year or two. Sometimes more, right? Depending on how invested they are in the game. Could be considerable. How much is it worth for you to go and get one of those customers? Right? Like you said, this is a loss leader program. You're not making profit off of the fact that these people are coming in and giving you $20 to go through this program. But long term, if that person
it pays itself 100 times over.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's absolutely worth.
Yeah, the best kind of marketing program. So that's really interesting. I wanted to talk about the custom programs because I saw that on your website when we were doing the research that you have, let's say, non-standard Magic program, like non-standard, non-typical Magic formats.
Yeah.
Why? How did you go down that road? Like, where did that come from?
I just love making up Magic formats or just game ideas in general. I like just making board games for myself. I don't market anything or anything like that. I just make them for myself and my friends because I like to make them. And Magic's so easy to malleable and easy to make stuff with. We have 3 formats, I think, on our website. We have one called Masters, which is just like Legacy Light, I guess. It's where you can only play cards that have been printed in master sets or masterpieces. So it's pretty much like Legacy without the reserve list. That is mostly just for funsies. The other 2 are a little more active within the store. We do one called Booster Battle, just like a 2-pack mini master. It's good for whenever a new set comes out and people are just looking for a quick casual way to play with a couple of packs. And then the last one is one that's very new that I'm pushing pretty hard actually in the store. Called right now we call it Basic. Not really tied to the name of the moment, but it's pretty much just standard singleton. I see a lot of people. Certainly not complaining, but certainly people buy booster boxes when a new set comes out, a new standard set at least. And then because standard globally isn't doing really hot right now, at least in paper, not here either, those cards just sit in people's shelves. And I find that really sad, I guess, that people are buying cards and, these cards, effort went to designing these cards, they're designed to work together and so forth, and they just sit there collecting dust. So I was looking for something that was kind of a classic Magic. What's the most laid-back version of Magic? Sort of how it was in the 90s. Like, I built this deck, you built this deck. Let's challenge each other. And so we were like, all right, how do we just cut through it, make it just a normal game of Magic, and as cheap and as accessible as possible? So it's a 60-card singleton. Use the 8 most recent sets instead of the usual standard rotation. And, that's it. That's all it is. It's really nothing special. But the people that have been involved in it here in the store have had a really, really great time. It just feels like when you first start playing Standard as a kid, and everything's new. It's not just this is the deck that did well at the Pro Tour. I'm just going to go build this, and that's all I play. And Standard gets a little competitive, so I was just looking for something that kind of fits our ethos of casual events, with allowing people to use the card that they currently bought, and something that's very accessible for new players.
Kind of recapturing the nostalgia of some of the earlier days of Magic prior to the internet and hyper-efficient formats and, things becoming solved immediately.
In the early days, it was like, this card's cool. You should throw it in your deck because I like it. It's awesome. And that's really what I was trying to harken back to. And
customers are responding to this? Like, this is something that people come out for on a regular basis?
Only do it for a couple of months. It's a small, slow crowd, but there's been a lot of interest in it. And I've been advertising it lately by posting deck lists online and just talking about, like, here's how it works, this is why I'm playing this, and then you're looking at your average deck price the same as a pauper deck a lot of the time. So, like, it's just very minimal investment required.
A good way for people to play Standard when Standard may or may not be the thing people want to play at the moment.
You can play it at home in your pajamas for free. It's kind of a hard sell to play in paper, unfortunately.
Exactly. So, been in business for a while now. You've obviously learned a lot as you've gone through, the lessons, and you've built up the store to what it is today. Two things. What's the one thing that you feel like is maybe the biggest mistake that you've made since you've opened the store? And then want to flip it to the other side. What's the thing that you like? Major success. This is the one thing that everybody should be doing.
I think the biggest mistake, and I'm kind of shocked that I'm still in business, was just sort of being undercapitalized at the beginning. With this small amount of money that I started with, it kind of blows my mind that we were successful. But it also helps that we're in a town that had literally no other options for game stores. And our starting stock of product was left over from the previous game store that went out of business. We just bought their stock. But, I mean, there's a reason they went out of business. And so looking back, boy, that was a really dumb thing to do. I should have just started from scratch. A whole bunch of, you go through this stuff and you're like, okay, there's some things people want, but then there's a bunch of expansions to games that don't exist anymore. This dead miniature line, things like that.
Yeah.
So that was a lot of money just down the drain, honestly, at the beginning. It was the kind of thing that would probably put a lot of places out of business if they're not super careful. And it was, those first couple of years were like really, really tight. The other mistake that I can think of was more recent, which is when we decided to move to our current location, the one here, in which, in the summer of 2019, we're like, all right, the lease is up. We've outgrown our space. Let's move. I was like, all right, the new lease is signed. We've picked our spot. The spring of 2020, we're doing it. We're moving. Spring of 2020.
Perfect timing.
Well, yeah, perfect timing.
You can't, global pandemic. You can't really foresee that. Right? They can't say that was my bad for not prophesying that was going to happen. But obviously, you made it through, right? You're still standing. Everything's still good.
Yeah, COVID was a little tough. Being shut down for a little while here. I sold more paints than I've ever sold ever. When people are stuck at home, they got nothing to do. Man, miniatures and paint sales through the roof, and D&D books too. Yeah, it was perfect time for those things. Yeah.
Interestingly enough, for the stores that could handle the weather, like you had the funds to be able to operate and continue running during the pandemic, and did it well. They thrived. There's a lot of places that did very well despite the fact that they couldn't be open, which is interesting and fascinating on its own, because I'd say before 2020. The prevailing idea was that if you're not running events and you're not getting people in the shop, it doesn't work. The business model really doesn't work. That, But the pandemic proved that that's not necessarily the case. Yeah. It was really store dependent. There's a lot of places that did not survive that situation, and sad. So flip the script a little bit. So those are some of the bigger lessons that you learned. Some of the bigger obstacles that you managed to overcome, obviously. Sure. What are some of the things that, you really hit the nail on the head, that you feel like you did really well, or, was something that really resonated with the community, that kind of thing?
Yeah, I can think of a couple. I think, remember, we talked about how we switched from more competitive stuff to more casual stuff, especially with Magic. Remember the first pre-release? I think it was like Battle for Zendikar pre-release or something like that we did that with. And we, set up a side activity, a little mini game for people to do between rounds. It was a ring toss thing with hedrons and stuff, and we did flat prize pool when we'd always done really high end prize pool, and thought about how to space out these events to make it more comfortable for everybody. Didn't do the midnight event for the first time ever because everyone was just so miserable during them. I remember getting emails back, multiple emails from brand new customers saying oh, this was the best Magic event I've ever been to. Yeah, I had multiple emails talking about, oh, this is the first time I ever went to a VA. I was so nervous about it, and you guys made me so comfortable. And there were some people that are out of town, too. Like, oh, I visited from Florida, which is in the area. I went to your pre-release. Your pre-release was amazing. I was like, okay, clearly
onto something.
Doing something correctly. Yeah. I remember that really got us on the track of where we are now.
Yeah, that's a really good sign, because you don't get a lot of praise. Like, generally speaking, people do not go to their way to tell you, hey, I had a great time. Yeah. I just wanted to let you know.
Yeah, it gets reviews every once in a while online, but yeah, it's rare somebody just comes in and says, just says something like that. Just last week, we had a customer come in and bought a gift certificate as a regular customer. This had recently had a kid who had just grown up and started playing Pokemon. He was bringing his kid by for Pokemon now, and he was buying a gift certificate, and I was like, oh, is it a birthday or something? He's like, yeah, it's a birthday. I said, okay. And then he comes up to me later and says, this is for one of your employees. He's been so good with my kid and helping him teaching him Pokemon. And so he's just like, just make sure I'm gone when he gets it. And so later, the dad and the kid leave, and I gave the gift certificate to one of my employees. Said, hey, this is for you. It's from this customer. He's just really appreciative of how good you've been with this kid and how well you've been teaching Pokemon. And it was nice. He got teared up. It was a very nice moment.
It does not happen very often.
Yeah, it's amazing to see stuff like that.
It says a lot about your employee or your team. Then
he probably would upset if I told you a story, but
hopefully not in a bad way. Yeah. Hopefully not. So, how many people do you have on your team at this point?
I have 3 employees, so it's just three people and me.
Any tips or tricks on finding the right people? Because obviously you've got at least one person who's on the right track.
And whenever I'm looking for somebody or looking to hire somebody, I really don't care about game knowledge that much or skill level or anything like that. I care about social skills. That's what I really care about. Can you hold a conversation with a customer for a certain period of time? Anything game related, you can learn. Everyone else in the room who's playing games learned at some point too. You can too. It's nice. It helps, makes things easier if you already know some game stuff. But I've hired people before that had zero game knowledge and just did fantastic, just because they were pleasant, sociable people. I don't need somebody who can, sell anything. I just need people who are kind and open and social. That's what I really care about.
Those are the soft skills that matter when it comes to sales or customer service and all of that stuff.
Yeah, I can't teach someone to be honest and social. I can teach you how to play D&D, but you've got to come in with certain skills already.
That makes a lot of sense. So, tool-wise, I'm curious, what do you use on a semi-day-to-day basis? Like, we're talking software, technology, like, what's something that you have found to be particularly useful or valuable for running the store?
I mean, honestly, good point of sales software is always useful just because it can organize customers and finances, things like that. For me personally, I have a small background in graphic design, and having access to a good image editing software really can change the way you advertise things in store or the way we put our logo on everything we can. Any flyers we do are really personalized. Like, everything feels like it's Critical Hit Games here, and not whatever I got sent to by Privateer Press or Wizard of the Coast or Games Workshop just to throw on the shelf or on the wall, or something like that. So if you have a good image editing software, or you just know somebody who's a good graphic designer, our logo design, stuff like that. That's something that can make your store unique.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I've seen a lot of places do that very well. If they've got somebody on staff who's just capable with Photoshop and just can whip something together, or maybe not even Photoshop, but something like Canva is accessible enough for most people.
Photoshop's so pricey. But even something simple as, like, if you have put a label on your fridge with what the price of the sodas are, you could write in hand, or you could put it in Times New Roman font on Microsoft Word, and it does the job. But it doesn't really look like your store. It doesn't look professional. It doesn't. But if you take the time to pick a font out and design it and so forth, even something as simple as that really makes a difference.
Yeah, it's funny how those little details really do add up.
Yeah.
Things like having your logo, the style. I've seen a few different game stores that do this really well. like a particular font, like having just a font that you have chosen to be, this is my font.
Oh, yeah.
That will define your brand in ways that's hard to define, right? Like it's hard to explain, but like
consistency matters. Yeah, absolutely.
it gives your store a flavor, right? It gives people a little bit more taste of the experience, right? And it's also pretty crucial to the WPN Premium process as well. Like they want to see your store. They want to see what makes your store your store. They want to see what defines it, and they don't want just generic stuff, right? They don't want like Wizards is looking for a certain level of quality, and that's one of those things that you need to be able to bring to the table if you do want to achieve a premium status.
Yeah, absolutely. That's when we moved in this current location. I was thinking about premium as we were moving in. That's the kind of stuff I was like, all right, this is a checklist. Just hit as much as I can. I remember we did premium. We did our first walkthrough video, and our rep was like, there isn't much to do, to be honest. If you've kind of checked everything off it already, this will be a quick process, and so you just make it as painless as possible.
That's a really good start, because I've heard a lot of not horror stories, but I've heard a lot of store owners have challenges going through the premium certification process and getting, even when you've like you said, you checked all those boxes, usually they come back with, well, you need to like update your garbage cans or something like that. There's always like, we need to suggest something. Yeah. So when you did the move, were you expecting to go to premium? It was like that part and parcel with moving to a new location. You wanted to have that happen?
Yeah, it was on the to-do list. I didn't know when we would get around to it. And COVID obviously just threw everything for a whack. At a certain point, I was like, all right, well, I'm not thinking about this at all right now. I'm just going to focus on keeping the doors open or the lights on.
Yeah, absolutely.
But yeah, that was a big focus of it.
Okay. So we talked about tools, things they use in the business. What about knowledge? So you said that you basically learned on the go, right? You opened the shop, you felt like you could do a better job running this kind of a business, and you thought there was an opportunity there, and you kind of learned as you were building things. Has there been anything or any books, any resources that you found useful that kind of like helped guide you on the way that you think people would be, that they could benefit from, that you'd recommend?
In the early days, it was a lot of just the WPN articles that were getting posted.
Okay.
And unfortunately, I'm not even sure they're up anymore. They were old articles, but they were really focused on the kind of stuff that we do, and I guess they're the first inspiration. Another thing was just going to conventions like Gen Con. There's so many good panels that you can go to that are just about running a good game store that they're helpful. I wish I had a book I could tell you that I've read that would give me great knowledge, but I just didn't, unfortunately. And then Facebook groups. There's a Facebook group part called Small Game Store Sanctuary. You'll find tons of other game stores that are doing quite well, and you can bounce ideas off of, and they're very helpful.
Philosophically, talking about why you got into this business, we talked about the reasons why you felt like there was an opportunity there. What were you hoping to achieve in terms of what is the vision for Critical Hit Games? What's something that you want to see over the next 5 years for the store?
I don't really have any grand plans of opening other locations or anything crazy like that. The main focus of the store from day one was to provide this community with the best game store I could give it, and that's still the focus. All I really, really want to do is just keep growing the player base and making sure that it's always a comfortable and inviting place for everybody.
Succinct way of putting it.
5 years. Yeah, then mission accomplished. I'm happy.
Ah. Well, you already short-circuited my last question. Then it was going to be what's success look like for you? And I feel like you've already answered that. We got it. We're done already. We're good. The other thing that I do want to ask is if someone's listening to this and they're thinking, I want to open a game store. This is something that I want to do in the future, in the next, say, 6 to 24 months, and they're listening to your story and they're taking some of the lessons in, okay, I'm going to do casual stuff. I'm going to focus on this. I'm going to add these to my business plan. What kinds of advice would you give somebody who was in that stage of their potential journey? What would you tell somebody who's thinking about opening a store right now, 2023?
First thing I do is check the area to see if there's lots of competition in your area, if you're by yourself in this territory. what's the population. There's certain things you got to do ahead of time. Pick out a good location, things like that. And then the question is, what kind of store do you want to run? This is just one type of game store. There's lots of different types of game stores. There are those clubhouse stores we talked about. Some of them have been very successful. They meet their niche, they meet their community, and that's great. Some stores are half of a cafe, half of a game store. Depends if you're in a big urban area or a rural area. There's so many factors that go into it. I guess it's just know your community. That's the biggest thing I can say, is just be aware of where you're opening your store and who, what kind of games are going to resonate best with you and your community, and be passionate about whatever you're getting involved in. And that's a tricky thing to figure out. You may not know it when you open. It may be something you have to change to over time. But knowing your community, I think, is the most important thing.
Yeah, and the one thing that I always like to also mention is that it's a boatload of work.
Yes, it's an insane amount of work.
Yeah, that's I know that.
If it's something where you have a full-time job and you're doing this on the side, hire a manager, hire someone to run it for you. If you're planning on doing it yourself, then it's your new full-time job, and you've got to be willing to take the financial risk that goes with that.
Yeah, and understand that you're not going to be playing games all day. You're going to be working all day. You're going to be doing the game of business all day, and get used to that sort of a perspective. Because if you want things to work out for you and you want to be successful in the long term, you need to be able to put in the time at the beginning to make it happen. Yeah.
The only time I play a game is when I'm running a demo. I laugh that I never played an expansion for any board game ever. The only time I'm playing is I'm teaching somebody.
If you had full control, you could wave a magic wand and you could make something happen in the industry, make something change. What's something that you would affect? What's a major change that you think would benefit the hobby industry as a whole? If you could be like, oh, I wish publishers would do this. I wish manufacturers would help here. I wish retailers would do this. What is something that you would just be like, whoop, let's make this happen, guys?
Maybe some sort of change in the miniature game market. I don't know. Miniature gaming is so... I love it. Look, it was one of my first passions, miniature gaming, but it's also so difficult to get into, I guess. I wish there were more options that the market would expand in a way that would allow some more options that are more pick up and play, I guess, in the miniature market. Having to put together giant game table, terrain, and all these built models and paintings, it's part of the hobby for sure, but it's such a mountain for most people to climb. There used to be things like HeroClix that used to exist, and I feel like there's a hole in the market for that.
Well, I guess for a long period of time, miniatures are a beast on its own, right? They're a high investment game that if you want to be able to play, you're laying down a lot of cash as a customer. You have to really dive into things. And I guess there's a gap at this moment for a more introductory style product.
Yeah, or more narrative, I guess. See, the miniature wargaming community is very tournament focused these days. I'd love to. There's so much flavor in miniatures and so much lore and so forth that I'd love to see almost sort of more role play elements get into it. When you see something like card games like Magic, you see there's tournaments for Modern and Legacy and Pioneer, but there's also Commander. You just want to hang out with friends and just goof around. And there just isn't that equivalent in the miniature gaming world. I'd love a Commander version for miniatures, I guess. Give me a Commander version of Warhammer. I feel like that doesn't exist.
Interesting. Cool. Yeah, so I guess what I do want to do is I want to wrap up on the final question, in a sense. I always ask a variation of the same sorts of question of, we're talking about success. We're talking about what it takes to succeed in this business, to make a game store that thrives, that pays you as the owner, that takes care of you, gives you the life that you want, but also takes care of the community that customers really appreciate. Just general, what does success look like for you specifically? Like you said, you're at a level where you're happy. What would the next level of success be for Critical Hit Games and for you, personally as the owner?
really harkens back to just growing community again. Like, as long as I can, pay my rent and put food on the table at the same time, while also dispelling any myth or feeling people might have of the classic game store. I mean, everyone, at least some point, thinks of the game store as like the comic book guy from The Simpsons. Or, and
that's a recurring theme on this podcast.
It is, yeah, it's a recurring theme, and just anything I can do to help dispel that is success. That gaming's for everybody. And we're in an age that's sort of a renaissance for this kind of stuff. It's bigger than ever. So anything that helps expand that and lets more people play Dungeons and Dragons and board games and Magic and Warhammer, the better.
I do want to touch on that a little bit too, as well. Now that you mentioned it, we are in a bit of a renaissance, and I think the pandemic is responsible for that, at least partially. Things were trending in this direction anyways, but I think the pandemic has kind of accelerated it a little bit and pushed people back towards the face-to-face experiences, the tactile, like move away from the screens. People want to be able to interact with cards. They want to be able to move their miniatures on a board and not necessarily just point and click with their mouse. So we're in some stage of this resurgence of, this hobby and this industry. Do you think that's going to continue into the future? How far do you think it's going to go? How mainstream is this going to be?
Sure.
Wild speculation. What do you feel like?
Yeah, I think it does have a cap at some point. I think there's an end point at somewhere where there'll be at least a little bit of a drop in this renaissance. Games are great, but also very complex. And people only have so much attention and free time and things like that. That at a certain point, people will make decisions to no longer play Magic or D&D or anything like that. But it is a little strange. We are definitely in a renaissance. I remember, even back when I was in school, that it was something you didn't admit to. You were a nerd, and today it's sort of like you're kind of weird if you don't interest in at least one of these things. Yeah, I think at some point we'll see a diminishing returns in this renaissance, but I don't think it'll never become unpopular. I'll never go back to that.
I don't think, things generally go in cycles, and maybe 20 years from now we'll go back to some completely different variation of things. But my personal take on things is that we are trending upwards, and hobbies like cards, like Magic, like Warhammer, board games, like this whole space is only going to become more important for people in their lives. Sure. And I think that if for the game stores that are doing, they're doing things well. They have the operations locked down. They have the customer service. They have a community that cares about them. They've got all these things in place. Those are the ones that are going to thrive, and they're going to continue to benefit from this surge of people getting more interested in having that sort of experience, whether that's in the store or at home. If you can serve that community and you have a business that satisfies that need, I think it's going to be wild speculation. I feel like it's going to be a good few years ahead as things improve.
Yeah, definitely. It's on the upward trend. Nothing grows forever, but as long as the industry keeps innovating and that the stores that are selling their products continue outreaching, that growth will go for a very long time.
Final parting words. Do you have any advice for listeners who are struggling, who are in the business right now, they're having a tough time or questioning or anything like that? What advice would you have for them?
It depends on why they're struggling, but I think about how who's coming to your store, how you're reaching them. Is there an audience you're missing? Is there a blue ocean of audience that you're just not even thinking about? Maybe do a ladies' night for gaming. Do something kids focused. There may be customers you're not even thinking about that could be an entire new segment for you. If all your catering is the same group of gamers over and over again, I love them, they're great people. Please come back. But there may be an entire part of your community you're not even paying attention to. So look at outreach. I do a lot of public school stuff, public library stuff, and anything to get people to know we're out there and to reach audiences that I'm not going to be able to reach through Facebook targeted ads or word of mouth.
Beautiful. That's exactly what I wanted to hear. That's perfect. All right, so last thing, where can people go to find you? Where can they go to find out more, connect with you, let people know?
Sure. You go to our website at crit-hit.com. You can check, there's links there. You can check us out on our social medias. And if you're ever in the Northern Maryland area, we're in Abingdon, please come and visit us.
Beautiful. Okay, well, thank you very much for coming on the podcast. This was a fun conversation. I'm glad we could chat and explore what makes critical hit games awesome.
Cool, thank you for having me.
All right, everybody, we will talk to you again in the next episode.